Hello and welcome to Feedback for the week of March 3rd, 2010. A very slow week.
Oh, yeah.
That's why I think we all have so much energy in this room.
Why are we even having a show this week?
I don't know. Joining us to talk about all the nothing that seems to be occurring in the world of games, we are joined by Patrick Klepek, Abby Happy, Sterling McGarvey, and Andrew Pfister. Hello, everyone. So, obviously, for the benefit of our audience, this is late on Tuesday. And we're already a little exhausted with everything that's just
feels
happened.
like a Friday.
Yeah.
It feels like a Friday.
Obviously, Patrick, and everyone, but definitely Patrick, a round of applause for your coverage of the growing story that is coming out of Infinity Ward. We're going to get to that in a second because that really is the excitement and the meat and potatoes. But it is not the only thing that happened this week.
Which is the amazing part.
Our week started at 4 p.m. on Sunday for most people that were playing something on their PS3. In a nutshell, what was the apocalypse with the clever PS3 for
Yeah, that doesn't
PS1?
quite work when you want to actually say it.
No, it doesn't.
The Twitter hashtag didn't quite pan out. But yeah, I mean, essentially on Sunday, if you turned on your PS3 at around 4 p.m., the PS3 has an internal hardware clock that's different than the operating system clock that bounces off the internet to figure out what time it is. So the operating system, or the internal clock, switched over to an imaginary leap year date that didn't exist, which would be February 29th, 2010. And as a result of that, it created this whole issue with attempting to sync trophies to the PlayStation Network for a date that didn't exist. So then it was kind of erasing some trophies. And then also, in addition to that, you couldn't play games offline that you wouldn't even be playing online in the first place.
Exposed this weird technological spiderweb that no one had any idea existed.
And some games that shouldn't have worked based on the rules we thought that existed for the error did work, like Uncharted 2. And so it was just really this giant mess that Sony seemed to have no idea what was going on or any anticipation that this was going to happen.
An episode of Lost.
It really was.
With our PlayStation.
Is that what Lost is like?
Yeah. Not knowing what's going on, time travel, pretty much.
And no synopsis of what happened before to help try to put any of it in context.
That's a pretty good description.
So this glitch, it seems to have had some relation to something that happened with the Zune, which I think has a smaller install base and probably is why it did not generate the same level of interest.
Yeah, I mean,
as the PS3.
there's similar. We've seen this happening on other types of hardware. The idea just that they didn't test something in the hardware in terms of how it handled a certain clock feature, just like we saw with Y2K, and the same they had with the PS3.
Except there weren't, the fear of Russian rockets.
Well, based on all of our reactions and the way we kind of hyped up this thing, you might have thought that the equivalent in the gaming space. But I mean, really, what seemed to happen was Sony themselves did not know what they were going to do and vaguely promised a fix within 24 hours, which coincidentally lined up with the Greenwich Mean Time, which is what the internal clock is running by, switching over to March 1st.
Do you think they were just sitting there with fingers crossed?
Everyone with their fingers crossed and praying that at 4 p.m. PST that all the machines would work again. And thank the gaming lords, the machines do seem to work mostly fine.
I think the one thing I found that was curious is that they seem to be working ahead of 4. It wasn't like everything started working. It was like, turning into a pumpkin or something like that. It was like close to 4. Word was getting out that stuff was working. I think our PS3 that we were checking out throughout the day yesterday started to work maybe about 3:50.
Yeah, I mean,
something like that.
It could be any number of factors based on when it was manufactured, when one component was installed. But it seemed like roughly between 3:30 and 4:30 yesterday PST that most machines came back online. Some people lost some trophies. Boo-hoo.
You were the one that just got challenged with the gods.
You just pissed off a lot of people.
Yes. I think Matt Kyle's story has become somewhat
I swear
lower
I could hear
around the
him
building.
screaming from my apartment. No, apparently he buried his face in a pillow and just screamed into that for the sake
Yes,
of
it was the challenge of the gods on God of War Collection for God of War 1. Not an easy thing to do under any circumstances.
He did it again last night, though.
He did pull it off. But it was just right there. He got the trophy, but he didn't get the trophy because 4 p.m.
He really hit him
evaporated.
right at 4. It was great.
Let's talk for
Terrible,
a second about sort of the way that Sony handled the situation. There seemed to be a very limited amount of information that was coming out. It ended about 9:30 on Monday, and then pretty much radio silence until 4 p.m. when everything went back online. I mean, I have to say, personally, I was a little bit surprised. I think that when you do have an expensive piece of hardware and clearly something that you didn't know about, that you never intended, is everything seems to be affected by it. even if there's nothing to report, the report itself offers some degree of comfort.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought that it would have, they released a small report saying, hey, we realized there was a problem before they'd realized what the problem actually was. Then they identified the problem, but then just went hours where everyone was just, it seemed like the consumers figured out what could possibly be the fix before Sony ever addressed it, which either speaks to maybe this was, the hardware was designed in Japan, so maybe that spoke to something that Sony Japan was working on, and the American team just wasn't allowed to say anything. I mean, there's a whole number of factors that go into this.
Are.
Sony's a very complicated company when it comes to like PR messaging between Japan, America, and Europe. And so, but it was frustrating because readers shouldn't have to have figured that out. That should have been them at least, even if they weren't going to acknowledge that 4 p.m. was going to fix it, because it sounds like they weren't sure that was actually going to happen.
Well, they were hoping.
I don't know.
Hoping that
it is a funny solution. Let time pass. All will be solved. That is a tough one to actually swallow. But the other thing that I don't think they're really all that related, but obviously all the problems that are happening with Toyota, and obviously the problems with these Toyota automobiles are life-threatening. Nothing that was happening with the PS3, rose to that level. But it was interesting for yet, another Japanese company not taking the lead and learning from the mistakes that clearly Toyota had, which was, not investigating things thoroughly and not being transparent about what they knew. Once again, they're not equitable, but I do think that it was funny in that context that Sony would choose this path of general silence.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I think most people, especially when we're talking about like a game system, if they had just said, yeah, there's a mistake, we're working on it, and we're transparent about that process, people in games are pretty, the unique thing about games is that it's not like if you want to play God of War 3, you can just go buy another machine. You can buy another car. You can, if you like music and your CD player breaks, you can buy another CD player. Like, games are inherently unique in that the platform, the medium you're consuming may be exclusive to that piece of hardware. So as a result of that, people are pretty forgiving because they really don't have a choice at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And if they just been a little more transparent, it would have been nice. But at the same time, it was over in 24 hours. So,
That happened.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and then something else did.
I mean, it almost feels like, that a kid's book where all these, amazing adventures and dangers and, scares happen, and then you wake up and it was all a dream. And then you just go have breakfast. The one thing that for me was a takeaway, and I think was a little bit eye-opening, is the way in which this did impact things that weren't just dealing with the PSN. That, we've experienced Xbox Live to go down for, periods of time.
Sure.
But it's just the world inside of Xbox Live that gets impacted. And for it somehow to kind of bleed out and start to affect my ability to play Heavy Rain, a completely single-player game, was a little bit unnerving. And I think there's a takeaway from this that we have entered into a little bit more of a uncertain future with our, online consoles. That it's not just... It's offline and online don't have a very clear dividing line anymore.
Well, it speaks to a lot of the fears people have over, discs going away and going towards a digital distribution future is what happened. And this is what, this speaks to when you see, a lot of people like to pick on PC fans, but when they get really upset about like DRM, like the stuff that Ubisoft is doing with their PC games, which require persistent connection, again, how often do you not have a connection to the internet? But then you see a situation like this where it's tied to the hardware and then just almost everything breaks. That's the stuff, it's not necessarily that game that people are scared of, but it's sort of the larger issue.
It's the future. It's the concept, how it applies to the future. Like, if you buy a $60 game, if you have the receipt, if you have the physical copy of it in your system, there's no reason why you shouldn't not be able to play it whenever you want.
Agreed.
I run into that with arcade games on Xbox Live. I bring my hard drive to work a lot. I travel between different consoles, and when I download downloadable content, it gets locked to a console. And then I can download stuff to others, but it's just very frustrating. Sometimes I'm playing offline at work, so I can't play. I can't access half of my content.
Yeah, I had that. I brought my.
That's a fairly unique. I don't think everybody's doing it quite the same way. But it's still frustrating.
More people will do that in the future, and I had that this weekend when I brought my Xbox 360 hard drive down to my girlfriend's cousin's place, and I brought they wanted to play Rock Band 2. I was like, well, I have a crap load of songs I've downloaded, but they don't have a network cable anywhere near their Xbox. So
I've run into that one a lot.
I plug in the hard drive, and all of a sudden, everyone's like, oh, you have so many songs. So we go to pick any of the downloaded songs, and
it don't work.
Gives you a data error because it can't connect and authorize the DRM, even though the hard drive is sitting the whole reason I pay a lot of money for Microsoft's proprietary hard drives is because they have some tech that's supposed to be better than a normal one I can buy off the shelf, and I can't even play the stuff I bought.
Yeah, this I think speaks to Happy Meow Meow. Bravo on that name, Happy Meow Meow.
I had no idea that you were reading someone's name for a second.
You know, Adam just
and I was like, I really missed something.
Wow.
This week.
It's been a long 24 hours.
This is that impending stroke that we've been wagering on when it's going to happen with Tesla.
I think I have that game on my iPhone.
So this feline writes, how much control do we really have over downloaded games? Is it really so easy to make them unavailable to play even after we paid for them? What steps do you think game companies can take to make downloaded games feel like a real purchase and not just a rental under uncertain terms? I think there's a very interesting point, because I still get surprised how I can't play games I thought I've downloaded to my hard drive if I'm not connected to the internet. It's not made terribly explicit that this game is only playable under particular circumstances and conditions.
Yeah, I mean, that's not made explicit at all. Like, I mean, I'm sure it's in, when you download it, it's probably there, somewhere in the
if you do the scroll.
Yeah, I'm sure they have the assumption that if you're downloading games, then you have a connection to the internet.
But yeah, it's,
yes.
Like the error that Rock Band 2 gives you is as though my hard drive is corrupted.
Yeah.
Like, it says the data is not accessible, and I'm
it
like,
does that too.
Sure
You get the little
is.
little triangle with the little,
Yeah, it's, and so, to someone that didn't realize, like, that would be extremely frustrating, because that doesn't explain to you, oh, sorry, you must be connected to the internet. It says your hard drive is corrupted.
Like when I booted up Killzone 2 to check it on Sunday, it just gave me a trophy error code with like a -1720, like a string of 12 numbers. And to the average guy on a Sunday afternoon on his weekend wants to play some Killzone. What?
Well, the part I love is with those string of numbers was the idea that you're going to call customer service and then read off a negative multi-digit number. They're like, well, I know exactly what the problem is there, Mr. Pfister.
Wait, did you say 7522654 or 53? Because there's a huge difference there.
The big cost difference.
Now, Sterling, I think one of the other things, we have talked many times on this show about that future where we no longer need the retailer, we no longer need the physical media. Well, this kind of shows that there might be a little bit of a large flaw in that thinking, that if we can't have a secure system, if we really need to be connected to an internet, if we have date problems on a chip that no one seems to know exists inside of the hardware, and all of a sudden all of this purchase data is suddenly just, it evaporates. I mean, is this going to stall? Does this show the huge problem that we have with digital distribution?
I mean, to be honest, this weekend maybe this sounds a bit strong, but it's really kind of shaken my faith in this generation of consoles and their ability to deliver on DRM, on their ability to give me hardware without major speed bumps, because I've had my 360 Red Ring on me. And no, maybe not being able to play my PS3 for one day isn't quite as bad as that, but still, it's a major, major issue. It makes me question not just these sorts of problems, but the greater scheme of how well are they managing DRM on the back end. In the future, what I was thinking about that I would love to see in future consoles, as much as they are pushing digital distribution as a means of cutting out used game retailers. We've talked about this a lot. What about the idea of being able to resell your DRM for like Microsoft points to somebody else when you're done playing it? What if you could resell Shadow Complex for like 800 Microsoft points when you're done with it to somebody else? I mean, it's like all these ideas I think would be fantastic. And now I feel like if they could just get the damn thing to work when I turn it on,
it's a success in and of itself.
Yeah, that will be absolutely a success in and of itself.
I don't know. I have a lot of MP3s, and I so rarely think that maybe they might all one day go away. I guess I've become so used to using, content in a digital form that this is worrisome, but I don't know that I'm like freaking out.
Yeah,
well,
maybe we accept that a lot of
having
people
my
did.
faith shaken is a strong term, but it was the first one that kind of came to mind. It's really making me question
questions, not just about like consoles and all that, but cloud computing in general. The concept of accessing
something like OnLive. I mean, it's like that's a lot of faith. I now realize that we're going to be putting into that service if I'm going to be spending that much money for something that doesn't even reside on my hard drive.
Yes.
I mean, that
makes me more nervous.
That's almost more acceptable because you can consider it like a subscription service, and then that's a total online service. You're just paying for the access to it. And then when something like that happens where the network goes down, it's a little more acceptable to be out of commission for 12 or 24 or 36 hours.
Yeah, when you can't play Heavy Rain, a non-online game at all because of a result of an internet connectivity issue, that's what's
something
frustrating.
you've purchased, you own physically.
Yeah, it's kind of like if the bank calls and says, please don't withdraw today. We don't have any money,
Yeah.
but we'll have some on Tuesday. It's not a comforting feeling. Back to something you mentioned, Sterling, because you did say that you have some problems with the hardware of this generation. A lot of our commenters here think that this thing was blown way out of proportion. And I don't think that we at G4 and many of our colleagues in the media necessarily did that. But I think, yet again, that wonderful world called internet seemed to get a little bit frothy at the mouth. Just right.
We did
right
have like
near
an
the corners.
A-bomb going off.
Yeah.
However tongue-in-cheek it was.
The potential for the A-bomb was there because Sony wasn't talking,
Sure.
and
Exactly.
Right.
That's the thing. We just need reassurance.
Yeah.
It's really just that comforting word out that goes, hey, guys, we're on it. And even if they're not, as long as they say that, part of me goes, oh, well, they're on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
somebody
I know
knows
that.
what they're
Someone
doing.
that
Top
said
men.
that.
I am
top
sure
men.
the top
Even
men
if their
are on it.
plan is like hiding under their desks like this, until they figure out a
We've got
solution.
really
Lie to
strong
me.
desks.
Lie to me.
Just sit
There
I-
going, where's Greenwich?
We shouldn't tell them that they should lie to us, but we kind of should.
Now, Star Wars Enigma writes, I don't know why everyone is blowing the PS3 glitch out of proportion. It was just a small glitch that was fixed or fixed itself in approximately a day. If it had lasted a week, then I can understand calling it an apocalypse, and that's what the PS3 is. So clever. But since it didn't, the media is just over-exaggerating. Are we over-exaggerating?
But he spelled it apocalypse,
You're right.
which means
Apocalypse,
were we
which
the
is kind of cool.
Comments stricken from the record. Do not acknowledge.
I mean, was there over-exaggeration? I mean,
I think there's
I
probably a little bit of over-exaggeration by everyone because just the idea of such, we're used to seeing isolated incidents, but to have something so widespread to affect everything and then not only affect us as consumers, but it affected the dev units too. Like this is the ones that
Sure.
developers are making games on that a lot of reviewers are playing God of War 3, which is what started a lot of the
Yeah.
people upset on Sunday afternoon.
Heavy Rain, God of War 3,
Yeah.
Final Fantasy.
And that's the thing. Like, if no one had anything to play on their PS3 right now, who cares?
Exactly. If this
might
was
not have
March,
even noticed.
If this was March of 2 years ago,
Yeah.
who knows who would have noticed it? But this is at the height of of Sony getting really good content out there.
They're on
So-
on a roll right now, and that's why it really pissed everyone off because they want to, they want to play their PS3.
Well, I also think that because of their whole radio silence for such a long period of time, I mean, that kind of festers resentment. And just as quickly as everybody immediately goes, what the hell's going on with my console? And everybody's tweeting and everybody's going on forums, and overnight it's boiled over.
It does. It
is
has a
short
lot to do with
24-hour
the
period.
social media.
Yeah.
And I was
But
also
it's
going to
like-
add, we're the gaming media. We don't get big things a lot. Give us something. But God,
Sony doesn't when nobody says anything. It's just like what happened when Microsoft for a long time would not acknowledge the Red Ring of Death. People were furious about it.
Yeah.
When you don't say anything, all you're doing is breeding hostility and resentment. And therefore, our coverage, in my opinion, was just us giving our audience an avenue, a punching bag of sorts, while they were waiting for their PS3s to reactivate.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, to like my sort of jokey point. But seriously, I mean, there are very few news stories that really come out of gaming that have that could make a larger impact, that could get picked up by, a larger,
CNN.
CNN, or there's very few really of those stories. There's like the motion control stuff you see kind of going into the mainstream. But you have a day when one of Sony's major hardware units, goes crashing to the ground.
Essentially flatlines
if that
for 24
doesn't,
hours.
If it flatlines,
Yeah.
if that doesn't go back up, over the course of the week,
And again,
it
that's-
starts to get something that gets
Yeah.
even more of interest behind
And
it.
once people figured out that it was related to the clock and they theorized, at 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, again, it'll kick back on. People seem to calm down and people
Sure.
got
they
rational
did
again.
that to
You know what?
themselves.
It's
Yeah.
almost like probably what early man had to do during their first eclipse.
Yeah.
It's like, where's the sun? We're
Wait
going to
a
work
minute.
this out. And that's probably how astronomy then evolved. It's like, we need to have an answer here now because this is scary.
And plus, as soon as you have the chance that it's going to affect anything that has to do, because if they all crash and they don't go back on, then you have a stock prices issue. You have
Exactly.
corporate. As soon as money's involved, everybody's interested.
which is going to be part of our next story. I think my final thought is, with the Red Ring of Death and the Apocalypse comparison, the one thing is Red Ring of Death has a longer term impact on the individual consumer because you suddenly really have a non-functioning console until you get a new one.
4 times.
But they don't happen to everybody all at the same time.
Exactly.
So I think
Right.
that's where you have the yin and the yang between the two situations. With that, PS3 story. I don't even know. Yeah, we might revisit this back in December for top stories of the year, but I think that its time has passed.
Yeah.
moving on to a story that I think we will continue to be talking about quite a bit, and this is Infinity Ward. This all happened, 2 hours after we thought we had put the PS3 story to bed.
Yeah, that was, we had thought like, we did our big thing for the day.
We were packing up, ready to go home.
Adam and
I was at home having a beer.
Yeah, you were. I was on my way home.
Like Adam and Adam and I had just done Attack of the Show. Then I get to my desk. I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna like chill out for a little bit and like maybe think about some Lost. And then all of a sudden, I got some information from a source at Infinity Ward that had said that, as described as bouncer types, had showed up outside of Infinity Ward's offices, and they weren't speaking to the development staff. They weren't explaining why they were there. They had checked with the security at their building normally and asked if these were there for any particular reason, and they had no information. The studio heads, Vince Zampella and Jason West, had been to some high-level meeting with Activision earlier in the day, had not been seen since, and at that point, Infinity Ward was kind of freaking out, and the terms used to me were confused, freaked out, and we don't know what to do.
Which, I mean, you know what? And we've talked about this, I think, on numerous talkabouts and programs. I mean, using security during times of transition in a company is not an unheard of thing.
It's what happened to me about a year and a half ago at my old job.
It's just not a good sign when it happens.
No. Well, but also, I think this lack of information and the fact that these are plain clothes rather than, the honorary badge that gives some sort of illusion of authority. I can see that would be very unsettling. I think definitely highlighted by the absence all day long of the two studio heads.
I mean, it speaks to what we were talking about even with Sony just before. The lack of information is what gets people to start theorizing, to get scared about what's going on, maybe when there's nothing to be afraid of. And so we originally, we ran this story about this happening in Infinity Ward, thinking that there's probably something more to this. This feels like this is something a little bit more than just a random occurrence.
A small convention of plainclothes security men outside of a game developer's office.
I was mostly amazed by the people who reacted like they'd been dragged out back and shot. I realized that there's not violence going on.
Yes.
You know that, right?
Let's go
Who will
once
be
again.
the John McClane in Infinity
Heads
Ward?
of executives missing. Guillotine spotted.
Yes. Things sometimes happen that are stern and strong in business. Please don't think it's an action movie.
And if you
nor
just read
thriller.
headlines, I mean, if we all just read headlines, I'd probably spend like 50% of my day under my desk crying.
Yeah.
And right now I'm only at about 25%. So,
Between Bat Boys and Aliens, I'd be like, I'm not going outside today. Anyway, Patrick, and this then moved into another discovery.
Yeah, well, the thing is, earlier in that day, like at 6:30 in the morning, Activision, I get a lot of different releases from a lot of the major publishers, like SEC releases and different things they have to file for investors and shareholders and notifications. So I got this 150-page document from Activision early in the morning, and I had been in San Diego this weekend, so I was in the office rushing, and I was just like, I don't have time to go through that. But after this happened, I was like, maybe I should go back and see what was in that.
And it was the 10K, the annual report. I mean, this is the biggie that kind of shows all the money they've earned throughout the past, fiscal year.
Yeah, and this is like a 150-page report, and so I just, Control F, and I search for Infinity Ward and find this 2-paragraph entry that says that Activision was currently dealing with a human relations issue where they were investigating 2 employees at Infinity Ward for breach of contract and insubordination, and that they expected to have that resolved soon, but it not to affect the company's bottom line. And all of a sudden, this story became much more real than originally anticipated.
And this happened simultaneous with the LinkedIn post from Jason. That
LinkedIn and Facebook, yeah.
Right, that we still couldn't identify at that time as necessarily being from Jason, although how many people are trying to ape the identity of the chief technical officer of Infinity Ward, I don't know. But, that had also...
Every little girl's dream.
That had given the impression that he too had he no longer had his job at Infinity Ward and Activision.
Both of them, changed their LinkedIn profile to say that they no longer they'd work. If you look at LinkedIn, it says like they usually when you're still working in a company, it says present, and instead all of a sudden it was a final date, suggesting that both of them had changed that to reflect they're no longer at Infinity Ward. So between security showing up outside of Infinity Ward, them being at a high-level meeting in the morning and not showing up since, an SEC filing saying that 2 employees were being investigated for breach of contract and insubordination, and then these Facebook and LinkedIn profiles being updated. At that point, we were able to reasonably conclude that it sounded like Vince and Jason had no longer with the company. We weren't really sure what had happened. one side says breach of contract insubordination, chances are the other side has a different
Probably doesn't say
interpretation
the same
of
thing,
what
yeah.
happened. But that gave us the impression that a lot of high-level changes were happening at Infinity Ward, and that has continued to play out throughout today as well.
What one man's breach of contract and insubordination is another man's casual Friday. I've always liked to say. So now that was yesterday.
Yes.
Moving on
That
to
gets us to
today.
about like 12:30 last night when I finally
Yes.
decided to go to bed.
I was exhausted. Though I did get to catch
Yeah.
Law and Order with Deborah Winger on it. I must say that really was a fine way to round out a good Monday evening.
Excellent.
It's like I wanted to know what happened to her since Urban Cowboy and those films. Anyway, moving on. So coming to Tuesday morning, obviously now things are a little bit exciting. There's buzz. There's definitely interest. Something's going on. What did we learn today?
So, yeah, today we started to, people went back to work after we originally broke the news. And a lot of other publications were starting to look into this. We were starting to get a little more information from different sources. And then I was reached out to again and discovered that Bobby Kotick was going to be showing up at Infinity Ward early this afternoon to have a meeting with the high-level leads at Infinity Ward, the guys that are sort of in charge of the different departments, engineering, programming, AI, that sort of thing. And then there was a separate meeting with the studio as a whole. Now, we haven't heard too much about what actually happened at that meeting, but around the same time the meeting was occurring, Activision issued a pretty extensive press release dictating essentially the next couple of years of the Call of Duty franchise and confirming officially that Vince and Jason were out and are temporarily replaced with two guys from Activision Publishing.
And scene.
Yeah.
We came to some sense of conclusion. Like we said, we don't really know what the status is of the rest of Infinity Ward. There are obviously many people that work there that have been with the Vince and Jason since back when they were 2015,
yeah.
making the Medal of Honor series. Obviously, I hope things are fine for those guys in terms of employment, because this is not a market that we ever want to see anyone kicked out into. But that is something that's yet to happen. Let's go over what these plans are with the Call of Duty franchise, because there was some surprises in that.
There's a couple major things. So the first one that they pointed out was that they essentially confirmed more detailed plans about what Kotick has talked about a number of times, which is to turn Call of Duty into some sort of subscription service. They specifically in this release said that they are looking towards Blizzard Entertainment as the model for what they want to do with Call of Duty in terms of turning it into this digital franchise that
and putting a game out every 6, 7, 10 years.
I guess. Yeah, I'm not quite sure they're taking that takeaway from Blizzard.
That's too bad.
But it remains to be seen whether that's something that's even necessarily targeted at us, because several times in the release they talk about the Asian market, and that's something that we've seen Electronic Arts, especially EA Sports. They have a number of MMO sports games that aren't over here that they have in Asia.
Online
the free-to-play
market.
online games.
Exactly.
I know they have Tiger Woods and
FIFA Online is in the
FIFA
works.
Online, yeah. So there's a lot of stuff where they're experimenting over there before they bring it over here. Remains to be seen how that plays out here. But the other major thing was that they, reconfirmed that Treyarch is having a Call of Duty for 2010. Said there's going to be a Call of Duty for 2011. Didn't say he was developing it. It's very possible at this point that could very well be Infinity Ward, but that they might not know that yet. But
Surprise!
And the other one that I think that was a little more surprising was that we saw some two guys from Visceral Games head over to Activision a number of months ago to form Sledgehammer Games, and they are apparently working on a action adventure Call of Duty due out sometime in the next couple of years. The reason they use that term seems to insinuate that's not going to be a first-person shooter.
And might be more whimsical.
I guess.
I mean, yeah.
Really
you
whimsical.
throw the adventure right there.
Whimsy of war.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards Gears of Hooah.
They did Dead Space, and you're looking to whimsy.
Yeah.
Sorry, new character, Oscar
It is
Mike.
worth pointing out that these guys from Visceral obviously made Dead Space.
Glenn Schofield,
Yeah,
yeah.
and they we're in the process of developing Dante's Inferno. These are third-person action games. I assume we are going to be looking at a game that will not be from the first-person point of view. I think we don't know it as a fact, but that seems to be
And pretty different third-person action games. There's a whole range.
Yeah, one of them you did never get off the ground. The other one, you were like, I'm up in the air, going like that, which probably won't be in a Call of Duty game.
What?
It's that Deborah Winger. It's that whole urban
God.
cowboy. I'm on.
Stop
the
bringing
back of
Deborah
the
Winger
animal.
into this.
Jump on it.
I can't believe I had to
that's
say
all I'm
that.
saying.
Stop bringing
just
Deborah Winger
I'm
into
surprised you
this.
didn't bring that down to your level, Sessler.
I'm just surprised you didn't bring up Terms of Endearment, Adam.
Yeah, actually, I still have never made it through that movie.
Save it for the Deborah Winger podcast.
God.
Anyway, so I think a lot of what we found in that press release, Asmagasm, yes, Asmagasm is his name, her name, who knows?
Rival for Boner Jam.
With the direction change
competition.
announced by Activision for the Call of Duty franchise, do you see this cash cow for Activision being Guitar Hero'd, as another poster so elegantly put it? By that I mean, do you think the Call of Duty franchise will move to the point of multiple releases within the same year, flooding the market with quickly shoved together games that eventually lead the consumer simply saying, we don't care anymore? I don't think that full scenario is going to happen anytime soon, but
we did bring up the analogy earlier.
And it is worth pointing out, I didn't bring that up originally before, but they are forming what it's called the Call of Duty business unit. And they did that with Guitar Hero as well, where they had an actual division of the company dedicated to sequelizing and figuring out how to annualize a Guitar Hero. And they seem to be following that path with Call of Duty. So I think, there is cause for concern if that is where they're going down. I mean, they clearly have some talented teams working on the games, but then again, Neversoft is a talented team that has done some good Guitar Hero games. The fear is that no matter how good the games are, if there's too many of them, and people get tired of it.
And also that team of talent, there's only so much that you can keep on asking them to output and you'll be able to keep your quality level.
I mean, we've still had alternating teams working every other year, so you still have like a 2-year development cycle. I mean, if you were to change that, then I would be worried about it.
They are kind of changing it. Like in this press release, we're probably not going to see 2 FPSs in the same year, but we're going to see a Call of Duty game maybe in each genre every year.
Yeah.
Like an action adventure game and an FPS.
Let's actually get away from the Treyarch Infinity Ward thing and just get to a perspective.
Beginning of the year.
Call of Duty Van Halen.
I could see a yearly World War II release, but then you have another one in addition that's of recent warfare or near warfare.
But then
that's
still the ultimate
adjacent warfare. I want to see that one.
The ultimate question is, it's still, is it too much? Even if it's different genres, is it too much?
Well, I mean, it's. We had 2 years between the really major Call of Duty releases. And World of War, it was not a bad game. I'm not going to say it was a bad game by any means. But I think for many consumers out there that, aren't that patched in, they don't know that Infinity Ward made one and Treyarch made the other. And that shift from, to modern times, back to World War II, back to modern times again. I mean, the brand doesn't have that clearer focus if you don't know the branding of the developers behind the title. And I think that this is what we've seen repeatedly with Tony Hawk and with Guitar Hero. If you're just buying by the name alone, you're kind of getting fooled ever so often.
I think to be honest, I think a lot of this move, it's a very cynical move on their part because it's something that they've done for years. And I feel like the way that what they've done to Guitar Hero is almost a short-term, more compressed version of what they did to Tony Hawk. So in Tony Hawk, they stretched out the milking over years and years and years, whereas they just completely compressed it. And it'll be interesting to see what they're going to do with Call of Duty. It looks like they're taking the compressed road again. My analogy is I hope they can minimize the cheese and all that milk.
To use another farming analogy, they're not rotating the crops as much as they are just growing the same crop over and over until the land is dead and moving on to the next one.
Why do you guys live in a city?
I'm from Wisconsin.
I don't have an excuse.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sterling doesn't have this.
I'm from Oakland. I don't have an excuse.
I lived on my grandma's farm for a while.
The farms that you and I grew up with were
Berkeley
that small
Farms.
patch of, that patch of grass before you go into the street. Let's talk for a second also about circumstances that led up to the events that started yesterday. There has been much rumor and speculation, but one thing that was identified, obviously, by the gentleman that was giving you information is that things were tense, and things have been described as tense in the relationship between Infinity Ward and Activision for quite some time. It was not a dirty little secret in the industry. It was a fairly well established,
fairly
one.
public too. At points where you had, I think it was Robert Bowling that really kind of tore one of the Activision producers, a new one last year.
Yeah,
and publicly, I might add, and it's been pretty well established.
And they admitted that there was a series of interviews where Infinity Ward admitted we gave them the pitch on Modern Warfare a whole long time ago, and they passed on it. And they later said, "Oh, that was a mistake." But Infinity Ward has proven time and time again that they seem to be a couple steps ahead of where Activision wants to let them go. And it seems like maybe that's come to a head in this situation.
Yeah, I mean that could be very clearly be something at play here.
I mean, did Infinity Ward want to go through with a third Modern Warfare game? Like, it's hard. It's like, we only get a little bit of the friction out in public in terms of what's going on behind the scenes.
Or did they want to do something with Modern Warfare that wasn't what Activision wanted to do with Modern Warfare?
Yeah.
I mean,
and there's always been, I mean, for about 2 or 3 years now, this space thing has been also circling around Infinity Ward, that they were looking to do something that wasn't in real warfare. I mean, it's funny, when you go see the guys over at IW, you would almost think like you're going to walk into a room full of Marines. And, these guys have imaginations that do go well beyond just kind of a modern day or World War II battlefield.
Apparently, all of our readers do too, because they had some really imaginative comments last
yes,
night.
Yes, what must have been happening. My favorite still is it's a publicity stunt. Like, yes, I'm going to bring
maybe
attention.
it still is.
Or it's trying to cock block Battlefield Bad Company 2.
That's my favorite one of the day.
I'm going to hurt that game by not working here anymore. Oh, no, what have I done? Damn you, EA. It's been a long 36 hours.
Yeah.
Yes, it has.
But I think the other thing that many of our readers understandably don't know, and I think has only slowly over time become apparent to us and was somewhat surprising, is that the way that Infinity Ward has behaved, a lot of that sort of bluster gave me the sense that they had autonomy, not just, they were allowed autonomy, but they were an autonomous entity, kind of similar to, say, what Insomniac has in their relationship with Sony. But no, they are fully owned, 100% by Activision. And so that might help highlight some sense of the friction that they could not necessarily, if this is what the case was, live their dreams, and that they had to always work in concert with Activision.
I think smartly so. Infinity Ward since Modern Warfare going forward, they took control of their own PR. Like they managed the community, and that around that time, companies were still figuring out how they were supposed to do that. And Infinity Ward was extremely aggressive of taking lead on that, and Activision pretty much just let them. So essentially, once a new Infinity Ward project is announced, Infinity Ward takes the lead on pretty much everything, and then Activision just backs them up. But, I don't think it's a shock that where we're seeing the friction is in between things. I don't think it's a coincidence that Modern Warfare 2 is completed. You have small teams working on DLC,
right,
and the bulk of the team is getting ready to figure out, well, what are we doing next? And that's the point where Activision steps in. We don't know exactly what happened, but I do not think it's a coincidence that it happened now before they figured out what they were doing next.
And that it happened on March 1st, their fiscal year ends.
Fiscal year.
Yeah, I mean, there's all the timing seems absolutely perfect. So where do you think we're going to go from here?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think I guess these things might be quiet for a little while going forward while, Jason and Vince figure out what their next step is.
Sure.
It's not exactly clear what the ramifications of what happened between them and Activision was. Did Activision, the way they terminated their contract or fired them or got rid of them or they left, there are a whole host of contractual issues that we're not privy to, that either they have a non-compete clause or they don't. So they might be able to tomorrow go to EA and just start a new studio, or maybe they can't do that for 6 to 8 months. There's a lot of questions that hopefully we can find out the answers to, but that it's really tough to speculate without knowing what their contracts are, and then and more specifically, what contracts that Activision has over the rest of Infinity Ward, because if there's no non-compete for Jason and Vince, if they go start a new studio, there's a good chance that they're going to want to pluck the best of the best from Infinity Ward and bring them over to the new studio and start a new franchise. I mean, that's what they've done for several series now. The guys at Infinity Ward have just gotten fed up with their publisher, left, started a competing franchise, and left that franchise to keep going at the previous one. And
I would imagine that there has to be something in their in a contract with Activision that says the no compete. But that said, when I was looking at stuff earlier and over the past day, California has been used as a shelter against non-compete laws of fair amount. So that I can't wait to see what happens with that.
Yeah, I don't think we've heard the rest of this.
Well, just think about it. We thought that Activision gave up Brutal Legend quite willingly and gave it over to EA.
Yeah.
And that turned out to be a lot more of a contest than we were expecting. So here, this is the golden goose, or potentially the golden goose. So I think it's going to be exciting. It's also, when we look at the events that just happened and what we think some of the motivations behind it, and we cast that against Bobby Kotick's DICE presentation where he was talking about valuing the creative. Wow. I mean, I wasn't 100% a believer when I saw Kotick give the presentation to DICE. Now
You might as well read this
almost
question.
very titty. Josh, which question is this? Who's
The Led Zepp addict.
Let's talk to Led Zepp. Let's read Led Zepp Addict's comment. How do you feel the whole situation at Infinity Ward reflects on Activision and specifically Bobby Kotick, who recently talked a lot of trash at DICE directed at EA? Does this scare developers away from Activision and solidify Bobby Kotick's perception in gamers' eyes as an unlikable person?
Well, I think all you need to do is sign on to Twitter or Facebook or read comments in the poster, and I don't think Kotick is considered a likable person. by
No.
most
Now, you know what?
gamers.
I also think that he doesn't really give a crap
Yeah.
what gamers think.
No.
People are still buying his games. The
Yep.
other aspect of this, yes, can he still get that level of talent that is Infinity Ward to come on board? Because this is one of numerous incidents. Obviously, you know, there was a tweet that came from Tim Schafer last night.
Yes.
Yeah.
About Activision, that, you know,
You can't
getting
argue
that,
with the beast.
beast.
You can't argue with the monkey. It's just going to go throw feces.
and
Yeah.
that, you know,
It's
when,
all it knows how to communicate.
Yeah.
at the DICE Awards when Jay Moore, who I don't think really understood what was coming out of his mouth, but read some absolutely scathing jokes about Activision and how the only way to get away from them is to cut off your own hand. It got a cruel laugh from the audience that surprised even him and said, wow, you guys really hate this guy.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like they have enough developers to sustain themselves in the short term, or even in the midterm. But it's the long term longevity of Activision. How are they going to? I was surprised when the Visceral guys went over. Like I thought Activision already had sort of a rep that those guys had a pretty sweet deal going with EA, but then they must have gotten an even
sweeter
sweeter
deal.
deal
Yeah.
from Activision. But it's going to be interesting to see how they can maintain that after, post Infinity Ward. Like, regardless of whether they keep Infinity Ward intact, and Infinity Ward is full of hundreds of very talented developers. So the leaving of these two guys, I don't
Yes.
think changes the fact that Infinity Ward could still produce a really phenomenal shooter going forward. But it does question this whole idea, and it's like you don't want to take sides, but when Kotick talks about fostering and maintaining creative cultures, creative talent, and then this happens, that makes you question, what's going on, regardless of what the particulars were. At the end of the day, those two guys left, and those
Sure.
two guys were the heads of Infinity Ward, the biggest franchise at that company next to World of Warcraft.
And leadership is essential in game development. I think more so than any other creative art that requires multiple people.
Well, yeah, and what we had just brought up, is how many people did Infinity Ward stay? I mean, if they do go on and they start a new studio with somebody else, how many people, decide to stay at Activision or leave and join a new one? I mean, if you quit and join a new studio, is that a non-compete? I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, we're going to have to get someone who knows employment.
Clearly, we're really good at legal things. All went to law school.
We're going to have an
know,
employment law
guys.
expert join
Again,
us here.
I was
and-
raised on a farm.
There you go.
It's slightly embarrassing. I really don't know the legal stuff. I'm just kind of throwing it out.
Well,
there.
I think the thing is, there's a lot of stuff up on the website about what happened. There's going to be more. I imagine more before week's end. Patrick, once again, thanks for your efforts, and to everyone here for following on the story. This is only going to continue to grow. But I think us playing the guessing game of what's going to happen is just going to get a little bit difficult. And there's one final thing I think we need to talk about. Because I think it's a little bit funnier than the last two stories that we went over.
Biggest news of the week.
This is the biggest news of the week.
Hands down.
So a rather short, 45-second, maybe a little bit
It's
more.
like a minute and a
15
half.
trailer for Metroid Other M. And this is something that we
Sea
were
of
planning on
bitter
talking about
tears.
today with Abby, who went up to go see Nintendo stuff, but then,
yeah, I went up to
Apocalypse
play it, and
Infinity Ward.
I tried to tell you.
A minute and a half to destroy 25 years.
It's only a cutscene from Metroid Other M, but
I've not seen this,
if
but
you
I am
told me, if
soaking
you didn't
up
tell
your
me it was
bitter
Metroid,
tears.
I had no idea that this was Metroid. Samus is young. Samus has a fey and
She's
lilting voice.
talking.
It's almost like you didn't read what I wrote.
I know.
Anyway, yeah, thanks a lot.
I mean, what?
But I was really waiting for you guys to get to see.
I mean, it's just like, what is the audience for this game?
See, I think it was like one of the little cubes in Portal towards the end. I was looked at it. What's that? What is that? Ew, what's wrong with your legs? That's how I felt watching it. What's wrong with her hair? What is this? I mean, honestly, young? I wonder, young and naive. The people who are making this obviously aren't young. Were they naive to think that people were going to eat this up? I think they were. It's terrible.
Andrew, I mean, we've all grown up on Metroid. Abby loves the Metroid Prime series.
And other
and the other
whole
Metroids.
series.
Super Metroid is my
Yeah.
number one favorite game of all time.
I mean, there's just certain canonical things I think that have just always been indicative of the series, and not one of those things was evident in this trailer which obviously was. This is a game that people are slightly suspicious about because Team Ninja's making it.
It was the first media we've seen since E3.
Yeah.
And, based on, Abby, when you talked about having played it, the gameplay you have, some issues with, but seems much more promising than the cutscenes and the story, which everyone, I think, universally is sort of on.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then so for the first piece of media to come out to highlight essentially the thing that everyone is most worried about seems very bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, I was recognizing some of the things that I was doing when I was playing the game. What was very foreign is, again, hearing Samus be voiced is so bizarre. Again, as like I've talked about it with you and whatnot, that she's never really had one before, and the character that you have maybe created in your own head, and then all of a sudden it doesn't really match up with somebody else's vision of it, including the creator of the game. That's weird.
Well,
It would be. I would say it would be like Link
That's real
delivering
weird.
a soliloquy.
Well, no, but
It's
Miyamoto has said a number of times he will never give a voice to Link, and he will never let Mario speak at length because you have a voice in your head, and there's a reason you don't do that. Because it breaks the narrative that you had in your head
Exactly.
from the nostalgia and the what you've created in your own personal narrative for the character over the years.
By the way, Link is giving Nintendo's press conference at E3 this year. Do I have to put the caveat that I made that up?
I think yes, people will run
Oh,
with that.
jeez. Yeah.
This
No,
is-
that's not true.
The story stuff, I mean, it just reeks of melodrama, and it's not the first time we've seen it. It started to seep in towards the end of Prime. In Prime 3.
Prime
and
3,
then,
yeah.
but it even started in Metroid Fusion, and this is a
Yep.
lot of the same story.
And
elements
Adam
coming. And it was
Malkovich is
Adam
coming back
Malkovich.
in this one, and he was the voice of the computer in Fusion.
And as much as I love Fusion, it was weird for me in Fusion too. Just like the story segments and the backstory for Samus. Like I don't need that in my Metroid game.
Now, is this similar to the discussion we had last week about old gamers and new gamers?
It could very well
We
be.
are all, at least when it comes to Metroid, we fall in the old gamer camp.
It could be because a lot of the comments in the video thread on the feed were very surprisingly
Yes,
disappointingly
Rick
supportive.
Aston, he
Guys,
likes
are you
it so far.
hyperventilating?
I'm just gonna walk out.
The Rick Aston figured that she was even younger than that when the parent-killing pirate attack. Let's just say that again. The parent-killing pirate attack went down based on the booklets. The other thing he says, and this is, I think, the most interesting line, actually seeing the story play out as opposed to reading a vague passage on what happened is fairly neat. Hopefully the gameplay is good to go with it. I actually liked it that I was not having the story told to me, I think, especially in the Metroid Prime games, because it gave that sense of loneliness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the best thing about Super Metroid is there's maybe one or two lines of dialogue in the entire game, and it comes right at the beginning, describing the setup from Metroid 2, and the giant emotional payoff at the end. There's no dialogue at all. It's just a scene that you see and you've experienced, and it's been building up and building up. And this game, I don't see it happening in this game.
It looks like a lot of drama is going to happen at the beginning and then just keep on going for that point.
We saw, playing through the first half hour or so of the game, there was a lot of exposition. There was a lot of cutscenes. I'm still holding out. I have to see more of it. From what we played, it was basically tutorial into the very first, up to the first boss. And there are elements of the gameplay there that I'm familiar with and that I recognize. And I came out of it really wanting to play more because I was so confused. And imagine, I was sitting there all alone without you guys.
Right.
And I saw it. And
You were
I
having
didn't know
a
what to
classic
do.
Metroid experience while watching Metroid Other M.
Yeah.
That's
Like-
almost too kind of snake eating
And
its tail
to
there.
talk to. I have to see more. I have
Well,
to
we
play
are
more.
going to see
I have
it
play
on
more.
June
The
20
gameplay is the
it's
most
June 23rd,
important thing
correct?
to me.
Yeah.
27th.
June 27th, the game is coming out, which is one of the other surprises. I think we're still going to be chatting about that game quite a few more times before we actually have the review. But that's going to happen in another feedback because we are out of time to close out what should feel. I want to say this is the end of a very busy week. But
only
it's
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Oh,
So,
God.
to all of you who are sitting here, Andrew Pfister, Shirley McGarvey, Abby Happy, Patrick Klepek, go home, get some rest, because there's still 72 more hours of God knows what is going to happen. Thank you all for your very hard work. For all of you out there that have not gotten a chance to see some of the stories, be it what happened with the PS3 or what's happening with Infinity Ward, you should check it out. It's dramatic, and I think we are all getting heart palpitations here. So check it out and be ready for next week when we're going to be having an amazing amount of coverage coming out of GDC Trust me, there's going to be information on games and everything that you do want to hear about. You're going to hear more of that as we get close. Just wanted to give you the heads up. We will have a regular feedback next week and maybe even a field trip from the wonderful cloudy city of San Francisco. Until then, take care.
Hi, I'm Blair Butler, and if you like comics or you watch the Fresh Ink segment on Attack of the Show, guess what? I review brand new comics every single week on Friday. Just go to g4tv.com/Fresh Ink and you'll have comics galore, a virtual waterfall of comics, although that would bend them and that would decrease their value, which is terrible.